President Trump's threat to deploy federal troops in U.S. cities in response to protests over the death of George Floyd is raising concerns the military is being politicized. Former Defense Secretary Robert Gates served 8 presidents in various roles, including George W. Bush and Barack Obama. His new book is Exercise of Power: American Failures, Successes, and a New Path Forward in the Post-Cold War World. It looks at the leadership and foreign policy decisions of recent presidents, including President Trump. Secretary Gates joins us now. Good morning, Secretary Gates. Thanks for being with us. I want to start with this sort of recent clash, if you will, between military leaders and President Trump. Defense Secretary Mark Esper and other leaders spoke out against the president's calls to use the military in containing the protests. What kind of impact do you think that has when the military and the commander-in-chief clash like that publicly?
Well, every president that I worked for, and particularly the 2 that I worked for as Secretary of Defense, had their disagreements with the military, and always the president prevails when he feels strongly about something. I think that the real issue for the military leaders in this recent instance was the question of using regular Army forces in Washington and other cities rather than the National Guard. The truth is, regular Army forces are trained to do one thing, and that's kill our enemies. They're not trained in law enforcement. They're not trained in crowd control. The National Guard is. And so when you look at an Army uniform, you see very little difference between the National Guard and regular Army, but there really is a difference in terms of their training and the purposes for which they're intended. So I think that was the issue that concerned a lot of the former military leaders.
You've said that every president uses the military as a prop at some point, but that this president has taken it to a new level. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, apologized for appearing at a photo op in a park across from the White House. And I'm wondering what you thought of that photo op.
Well, I thought it was unfortunate, and frankly, I felt like the military leadership was being exploited. I think they got themselves into a situation that they didn't expect and afterward regretted, and that was the basis for General Milley's apology. I think he was very sensitive to the appearance of the American military being political, and one of the fundamental tenets for our men and women in uniform is being apolitical and serving all of the American people, not just one president or one party or another.
You and other military leaders have voiced support for changing the names of military bases that are named in honor of Confederate generals. The president does not support that idea, at least at this point. Why do you think, first of all, why do you think those bases have held those names for so long, and why do you think it's right to change them now?
Well, I can't answer the reason why they've lasted so long. I think partly it's just inertia. Partly the names do have some meaning to the troops who were trained there or served there. But I think the time has come, and I think the events of the last couple of weeks and the killing of George Floyd and the demonstrations have presented us with an opportunity to make a change where, when we have these bases named for Confederate generals, it suggests we're celebrating them. And my view is we can't rewrite history, but we need to understand it, we need to remember it, but we don't need to celebrate it. And I think that's why the time has come to change the names of these military facilities. It's always puzzled me why we don't have a Fort George Washington or a Fort Patton or a facility named for an African-American Medal of Honor recipient. So I think it's an opportunity really to make the change at this point.
As you've pointed out, the military in many ways for a long time led integration in this country. But General Charles Brown Jr. just became the first African American to lead one of the nation's military services as Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Why do you think that took so long, given the history of integration in the military?
Well, it clearly took too long. We have had African Americans in senior leadership positions. Colin Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yeah. General Lloyd Austin was the commander in Iraq when I was secretary. But the truth is that at the 4-star rank, there are too few and too far between. And I think General Milley has turned his attention to that, and the attention of the other chiefs in terms of the promotion processes to make sure that more African Americans and other minorities are promoted into the most senior leadership positions in the Pentagon. It's not I mean, they will be qualified. There's no question in my mind about that, but there just needs to be more attention paid to making sure that minority leaders have the opportunity to be in the most senior positions.
Do you think there's been a systemic problem?
I think so, and probably in all of the services. I think the recent events, frankly, have I think been a turning point in the attitudes of a lot of people, and I think it's really grabbed the attention of the senior military leadership as well. The military, as you say, was out in front in terms of integration and providing opportunities for African Americans long before the rest of society. But particularly in terms of promoting leaders to the most senior positions, and frankly, some thread of racism, there still needs to be attention paid to this in the military, and as I would say, more attention as we go forward.
You say they've been a turning point for a lot of people, Mr. Secretary. Have they been a turning point for you in some way?
I think so. I think that, I think what many of us missed, and I feel like I've been an inclusive leader in the organizations that I've led, but I don't think many of us fully appreciated the day-to-day kind of humiliations and difficulties that African Americans, even the most successful African Americans, have had to deal with. And I think that's really come to the fore in the last 2 or 3 weeks in a way for many of us that had not been particularly evident before that.
All right, Secretary Gates, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Exercise of Power is on sale today, and we will be right back.